who's founder of Khalif Sisi, who's flown all the way from Nepal to join us and speak at this session. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And now may I hand over to Akanksha to take over the proceedings, please.
Thank you so much. Well, hello, and I know that we're keeping you from lunch, so we're going to try and make this as interactive as possible, and we will be opening this up for Q&A as well. So this panel is on gendered growth, investments, and barriers to enterprise and social development. Globally, we're seeing more women-founded and women-led VCs at the forefront of social innovation and economic growth, particularly in the tech sector. Yet, they're solving some of the world's biggest challenges when it comes to fintech, climate, security, energy, but the challenges remain. There still remains a lot of work to be done to bridge the gender gap and allocate equitable access to capital for female entrepreneurs. The global business landscape is evolving rapidly and dramatically in an increasingly precarious world. So amidst this, how can we ensure that true gender inclusion and equality remain at the forefront? What are the policy incentives that must be rolled out to ensure that tech capital is liberalized in a way that's actionable? And finally, how do we dismantle the long-standing barriers and biases that have kept women from fully participating in the tech and global business arena? And with that, Sarah Ahmadian, I'm going to open it with you. Access to capital is one of the biggest barriers to women in entrepreneurship. A lot of VCs do lip service, but unfortunately, not a lot of them put their money where their mouth is. And we know this because less than 2% of venture capital funding goes to women-founded startups, despite these generating higher returns on investment than those by male founders. This is something you're all too familiar with, given your track record in VC, you're a veteran in the industry. Can you speak about the systemic biases and obstacles that prevent female-led startups from securing equitable access to capital?
Yes, so we definitely have a huge problem with...
It's on. You have to press, turn it.
Hello? Oh, okay. We have a huge problem in the US when it comes to investment, as you mentioned, for women. And we haven't found a solution yet, to be honest with you. But I have a couple of things that we have tried and we are still trying to do to decrease that gender gap investments. We don't have any problem when it comes to education because we have a lot of women who are educated and ready to be an entrepreneur. But when it comes to investment, most VCs, they only invest in specifically white men still. There are two issues that are, I think, contributing a lot to that. First is because they are all white men, so they like to support people that they previously supported, and also they look like them, so they have this bias. And second is we don't have any role model. We really don't have a big role model when it comes to women entrepreneurship. And we will not have it until my solution is like having a VC company that only invests on women. And they have to, like, they allocate a specific amount of money, like let's say $100 million, only invest on women, and see what is the result, right? We have VC companies that only invest on immigrants, and we saw that the result is much higher return. So that's one of the initiatives that I'm pushing. But also, like, things that I see the Samir team, ORF, and the Irvine Dialogue did is like really pushing women to participate more in think tanks, in entrepreneurship ecosystem, and that's, it requires leadership like what you guys did in this conference that is very rare. These are the things that we really need to focus on to be able to like empower women and the investment part of having more women entrepreneur.
Can you turn off your mic for a second? So, can you hear me? So I'm going to come back to that because I don't know how realistic it is in today's tech bros and old boys club to have female-led VCs that are investing only in female entrepreneurs, because those will be far and few in between. We need more men to actually allocate capital as well. The answer, or the onus shouldn't only be on female VCs to do so, but I'm going to come back to that later. Ms. Alajbeg, let me come to you. We've looked at the systemic biases and the barriers that women have to face. From a policy perspective, what are the policy incentives, and I'm going to give you a actionable time frame within the next 5 years, to liberalize access to tech capital in an inclusive manner and remove some of these barriers that Sarah is talking about for women in global business and tech?
Yes. Thank you very much. Does it work now? Yeah. So thank you very much for that question. And indeed, it's very targeted. But 5 years' time is the time for government to adopt a new strategy. So it's right about time. But as the only representative of public sector here, allow me to go one step back and reiterate that even though we have gone a far way, we are not there yet when it comes to full gender equality and full women's participation in all sectors, not just tech, all sectors of society, I mean. So national and local policies, economy, even academic sector. So as Sarah already mentioned, we need to keep emphasizing the importance of having women at the table in decision-making process and in policy-making processes if we want to respond efficiently to these challenges. And the issue of women participation in global business in general is complex and still faced with many cultural, social, and structural barriers, not only access to financing, but also to, so to say, soft obstacles, insufficient business connections, lack of access to entrepreneurship networks, lack of advice and mentoring and leadership, lack of training and education, but not education in tech, but in business skills. And also psychological obstacles that are more common for women than men, like lack of self-confidence, capacity to take risks, that is really cultural and sociological for a long time. And in order to address all these challenges, we need strategic and multifaceted approach. So policy response to all that should include improving compliance and interconnection of all public policies that ensure raising the level of employability of women in the first place, including policies that promote better work-life balance and removing gender stereotypes, especially stereotypes about childcare. So it is important for governments to ensure policies that allow work-life balance and childcare divided between women and men. On education, which is important as well, we need to strengthen and empower young women and girls through trainings in leadership, in financial educations, entrepreneurship skills. Also provide, which is really important, possibilities for reskilling and upskilling, and provide funds for scholarships to that end. Then what we should include in these policies is promotion of women entrepreneurship through raising awareness through public campaigns. And we in Croatia have done several exercises on this, which have proven to be shown to be very successful, like choosing the female engineer of the year. And these ladies, it gives a boost to them to motivate them to perform more. And also the nice line of this initiative is that their colleagues suggest them for these positions. And last but not least, ensuring and promoting mentorship. This is also something that Sarah has mentioned, mentorships and business networks for women, because it has proven to be a strong tool for also encouraging young women to start their businesses if they have female role model and a mentor to whom they can turn to when facing some practical obstacles. And then, on top of that, support from government through favorable loans, grants, microfinancing to start the businesses. And these are all things that have been addressed in our new 5-year strategy that we are adopting in Croatia.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much. Those are very, I would say, tangible strategies and solutions to a lot of the challenges that women face. And Gayane, I'm going to come to you picking up from what Ms. Alajbeg said about childcare. I want to shift the focus on the cultural and structural barriers that hinder a woman's participation in the workforce. And a study by the World Bank on women entrepreneurship in Armenia found that both men and women said that housekeeping and childcare responsibilities were one of the top barriers to women in business. So keeping this reality in mind, can you speak a bit about the initiatives across the public and private sectors that can help women, specifically in the Caucasus, enter and actually remain in the workforce?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear panelists. It's an honor for me to be here with you. Yes, the main barriers are what the research says, but actually we have to go back and to see what are the reasons, because these are the consequences. And the reason is much more deeper than we can even imagine, and these are the main societal norms and stereotypes that shape our opinion, that shape our society in a way that pursue girls not to be, or not to take that courageous and actually not to be in first places in that way. But I want to just one remark, because we have also Armenian society and audience live, and I want, because we have lots of discussions on that, whether we need this equality or not, whether is it something that we really need, or is it just a right or not? Of course, for me, as a person who previously, or during my whole career, I was promoting, I was prioritizing human rights issues, especially gender equality, as a journalist previously, as a member of parliament, now as a civil society representative. But beyond the rights, which is fundamental right, beyond it, this is the supreme importance and interest of state and the society. Because for Armenia, which is very small, which has very, very limited human resources, ignoring talent, potential of half of even more than the half of the population is unacceptable luxury. Approximately, we're losing in our annual budget, we're losing $1 billion annually, not enrolling women in employment, not only the tech, but in general, which is huge for Armenia's 4 billion tiny budget. We cannot lose that 1 billion. So from this perspective, discussing these issues, we have to go back, understand what are the reasons. The reasons are the societal norms that really place women a specific role, that they should be married, that they should have this burden of responsibilities in domestic, in home, at housekeeping, childcare, etc., etc. first thing that policymakers should do, and this was also one of my main proposals when I was an MP, reform the education, because the main societal, these norms and stereotypes are actually our general educational system is actually pressuring or deepening the societal norms and deepening, just one example, very recently, our organization is working in rural community schools, and we were doing different trainings for girls, for all the classes, media literacy, civic education, gender equality, etc., etc. And during the debate, I asked one girl, what is your dream? What you want to become? And very proudly she said, I want to be an astrophysicist. And almost immediately, a female teacher responded, oh no, choose one more suitable profession for a girl, more suitable and normal profession. Who decides? Who defines this normal? So here we have to work, change the do the reform in education system, and this has to be multi-layered reforms, not just introduce curricula in a schools, different integrated curricula. It has not to be one subject or not, but it has to be integrated. But also to have a special monitoring mechanism to change the approach of teachers, because teachers are the main opinion makers, especially in small communities, and that's why actually my organization is focused to work with them, because they are deepening the societal norms, and this is the problem. But of course this will take time, because doing educational reforms is not easy, and changing stereotypes and cultural norms is not easy. It is long-term way that we have to start now, or we have started already. But still, there are lots of policies that can be done very shortly, in a short term. For example, we have also childcare problems. I will talk about during next round. But also STEM scholarships for girls, for STEM directions. Although we are in a good situation now, because as Forbes says, 50–60% of students in IT faculties of universities are actually women. But it not necessarily mean that they are ending up in a sector. So after education, they have this pressure of society, they are getting married, children and childcare, so that's so on. So first of all, first pillar is education reforms, because until we change...
sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for the interest of time. Give me your top two. So one is education reform?
Education reform and childcare infrastructures. I will talk about this, because here we have awful situation.
Okay, so we've touched upon North America, we've touched upon the EU, and now I want to go to the global south, because unfortunately, the more things change, the more they remain the same across the world. These are challenges women across the world face, whether it's in India or Europe or Canada per se. And I think one of the questions that we're going to be taking away from this, Gayan, is who defines the normal? And with that, let me go to our lone male panelist on this. Aman Thapa, we're counting on you to tell us what it's like on the other side. So I want to talk about the emerging markets, such as the Global South, that hold immense potential and opportunities, both in terms of capital as well as incubating startups that are solving some of these crucial challenges that we've been talking about. Your startup is one such example where you're bringing in overlooked members of society, particularly women. Tell us a bit about the startup ecosystem in Nepal, because I imagine there are a lot of misconceptions that exist around it, and how tech in markets like Nepal can actually help bridge the gender gap.
Thank you, Akansha. I think I should be speaking more on behalf of men today. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about Nepal. There's a lot of misconception. The top three mainly are Nepal is a small market, which is not. It has 30 million population. It's housed between two of the world's largest economies, which is India and China. So you have to our left and right half of the world's population. So that's a big market for Nepal. Second, a lot of people think they have this assumption that Nepal has an aging population because people travel there for meditation, yoga, after retirement and all of that, which is completely the opposite because 65% of our population is below the age 40. So that's why we're very tech savvy, adaptable, very entrepreneurial in mindset and updated. And the third, about the digital economy, people think Nepal is a rural market. We do mostly farming and all of that, which is not, in fact, the reality. Nepal is one of the fastest growing country in terms of technology. And so when I started the first e-commerce company back in 2011, the internet penetration was just 9%, but today it's at 70 to 75%, which is even better than China and India and Bangladesh and most of these countries. So these are the misconceptions that I wanted to lay out. But what is true about Nepal is that in terms of today's discussion, women represent only 20% of the overall tech industry. And so then after co-founding this e-commerce startup, which I recently sold, now I'm into building a waste management company just recently. And the stats are even worse for women there. 0%, I repeat, 0% of women are in the waste collection business. And it was a shocking fact for me. So just wanted to quickly dive into it. So what are we doing about it? So to understand why there is 0%, and this, I'm talking about collection, but in the overall recycling and waste management value chain, there's less than 5 to 10%, which is still bad. So when we looked at the core reasons why women are not into waste management, there are primarily three reasons. One is the physical labor demand of the entire industry. There are more than 50,000 informal waste workers in Nepal that normally they go on their bicycles carrying waste and all of that. They carry up to 100 kilos on their back, which obviously women cannot do. I mean, there is some stereotypical facts that we cannot deny, right? So what we did as Khali Sisi, my waste management company, so we replaced the bicycles and we introduced e-rickshaws, electric rickshaws, which are easy to drive for women. And now, instead of 100 kilos that men were carrying, women are carrying up to like 400, 500 kilos. So that is the initiative under Women in Waste. So we call it Swachha Mahila Abhiyan in Nepali, which is similar to Hindi. Second, what we realized were the scrap centers. There are over 5,000 scrap centers across Nepal. And all of this, 100% of the scrap centers are run by men. In India, we see the kabads, right? So the scrap centers are so poorly organized. It's even for us, it's difficult to enter. People are drinking there, they're smoking there. So women cannot operate in those, and there's no facilities for like different restrooms, childcare centers, and all of these facilities, right? So what we did, so in partnership with Coca-Cola Foundation and this NGO called Women for Human Rights, we're now building the first recycling center in Nepal, which will be completed in October this year, which will be 100% led by women. 80% women workforce is the mandate, and women will be the lead. So these e-rickshaw drivers will carry the recycle, and they don't need to now work with the scrap centers run by men. They'll then be working with us, which will be more safer for them and more operable, where women are running the show. And lastly, the third most important part was the lack of resources. Women for Human Rights, they work for the rights of single women widows in Nepal, one of the most vulnerable and marginalized community. What we realized was upon the sudden death of their husband, they have to become the breadwinner for the family, and they do not have the resources, even the capital to invest in a business like this. I mean, somebody has to put in the working capital, buy them the e-rickshaw. So now we're working with the leading banks in Nepal to provide them with, so the first 5 e-rickshaws were on purely grant, and the later ones are coming in terms of subsidy, no collateral, interest-free and all that. So the intent is by 2035 to have at least 5,000 women-based entrepreneurs in Nepal, which will bring the 0% stat to at least 30 to 40% in the next 10 years. Thanks.
Aman, thank you so much. You're doing incredible work, and that was a very insightful brief on the tech industry in Nepal. And I think you definitely have an audience from the Indians here. Now, Sarah Bressan, let me bring you in. We've looked at the challenges both across government as well as the private sector. And unfortunately, on both sides, the gatekeepers are the men, right? And women are often seen through this prism of soft power. But when it comes to talking about true inclusion in the areas of foreign policy and strategy, men still outnumber women in leadership positions in the field of hard power. Is there still a pushback on women in roles that are deemed to be tough, and how do we even begin to navigate something like that?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think there is definitely still a pushback, and I would say, so it's not the positions that are tough that women are not fit to be in, but it's, the question is, which are the positions that men allow women to be in, right? So traditionally, men have been in positions of power. Does that work? Yeah? Have you heard what I said? Okay.
Yeah.
So traditionally, men have been in positions of power, and when we look at different professions that were traditionally for women, such as care work, nursing, teaching, we can gradually see as women enter a certain profession, the profession gets devalued and the wage decreases. So you see how kind of the stereotypes that are associated with women, it's not that women cannot do these jobs. We've had this, for example, with teachers, right? In the European context, teaching used to be a male profession, like the professor from university and so on and so forth. Teaching becomes increasingly a female profession, starting with primary care, then going up to university. And everyone knows women are not better and are not worse at the job. But what happens is that the profession is regarded less in the public eye, and the wage kind of decreases. And so it's about kind of who do we let into which positions, and what then happens to these positions. And my kind of, I hope, simple formula to analyzing the problem is 3 questions. So where is the power, where is the money, and who does the care work? We've heard kind of this in different iterations a bit from my co-panelists. In terms of who is the power in the political space, we have 27 countries in the world who have heads of states or governments who are women. And if we continue at this rate, it will take at least 130 years to approach a parity in this space. When we talk about the money, we heard about VC capital, for example. I think in the late 2010s, early 2020s, the rate of VC capital worldwide going to women was a maximum of 7% per year. So 7% of the annual VC capital max going to women. And that's also like not a steady number, but it like goes up and down. When I talk about positions of power and the heads of states and government, you all know you probably have women in parliament, you probably have women as ministers, but usually which positions do they take? Again, it tends to be a gender equality ministry, it tends to be the child care, family care ministry, it tends to be the social ministry. Again, because of the stereotypes we hold and because that's where we let women be. But political systems, no matter what flavor or fashion of democracy or not, are representing the whole society, right? And that's at least 50% of women. So you see this devaluation and you see the dynamics that are happening there. Now, one word on the security sector and warfare. I mean, if we look at today's wars, we heard about the rickshaw carrying, right? There are certain differences in men and women. But today's demands in the strategy community, the IR community, and the security community are not actually going to a battlefield and fighting with a sword, right? We know what are the real challenges that lie ahead of us, and the discourse is often, so where are women's deficiencies? But the real question should also be, where are men's deficiencies if we assume that there are natural differences, right? I mean, we look, for example, and this is, you know, a facts-based argument, that prefrontal cortex development in men is delayed, which is why young males are very prone to be in car accidents. They're very like overly risk-taking and reckless, and which is why they have a higher rate of getting concussions while partying and when they are drunk, right? So this is just behavior that we do not need in responsible decision-making and positions of power. So, you know, when we talk about differences and we want to talk about differences, it's important to focus on the deficiencies and the advantages of both, and looking at the outcomes. And I think for the general political environment that we're in right now, when it comes to international security, it's both, you know, obviously a curse, but the positive, you know, in it is that we see that the current backlash against gender equality and feminism actually reveals the worst of masculinity, right? We see who wages wars, which heads of states internationally are waging wars, and this is not the flavor of masculinity that we need in the world. So where is the responsibility in those systems where positions of power, positions of money, and responsibility are held by men that allow these decision makers to have us live in the world we live in? Yeah, so that would be my initial statement.
Thank you, and Thank you, and I think we need a whole separate panel on toxic masculinity and the decisions that men make. So I think that is for the ORF team to bring about next time. So we will pass the suggestion on to Samir. Before I move on to the next set of questions, I'd love to bring the audience in as well. Do we have a mic? So does anyone have questions for our panelists? Raise your hands if you do. Okay, not yet. So I'm going to move on to the next set of questions. And Irena, let me come back to you. We've talked a lot about accessing capital, yet one of the key barriers and obstacles comes down to financial literacy for women. A report by MasterCard found that women entrepreneurs, particularly in emerging economies, don't always have digital tools or banking services or even access to them, which is a huge determinant in terms of economic and career growth. How do you think, or let's say, what would you think is the most realistic step we can take to improve digital literacy to better support female founders, particularly those that are operating in the informal ad hoc systems like those working with Amun startup?
Well, yes, women in tech panel, we are checking our mics all the time. Besides, you know, on digital literacy and investing in that and ensuring it enough for women, besides the obvious things that have been already mentioned, reforming the school systems, educational systems, providing STEM scholarships for those higher-end occupations in technical, I believe we can do a lot of efforts in promoting education in digital literacy in all areas of the world, actually, by combining efforts of governments, international organizations, and civil society organizations. And here I speak from my corner of development cooperation portfolio, which I'm in charge for, where we have tried as a small country donor that has been on the receiving end in development assistance until very recently, 2011. We have tried to invest our efforts and the small amount of money that we have dedicated for development cooperation projects to target the smaller projects that have high impact for society, like educating girls in digital skills and educating women and young persons in general for starting small and medium enterprises, businesses, also in digital arena. So, for example, we have funded projects in Kenya and Ethiopia together with UNICEF on digital skills for girls, where we have provided education for 20 or 10 young ladies for their digital skills to be used in their businesses, or even higher. I think in Ethiopia it was drone engineers that we educated there. In Western Balkans, which is our targeted and sectoral area, we have invested some amount of money, expertise, and experience that we gained through the EU accession, also in developing projects on digital transformation for small and medium enterprises, which then gives an opportunity for women also to participate in these projects. But again, let me come back to the basics. If we, and I believe it was also mentioned by Sarah in her first intervention, it's not enough to provide education. Because if you give digital skills to girls, but don't ensure that the rest of the society and environment allows them to use those skills for their ensuring their future, for their business, they will leave. And they will not be able to practice what they have learned. So again, the whole approach to this needs to be multi-layered and multifaceted.
Diana, let me bring you into this. We've talked about, can you hear me now?
I hear, but I'm not sure that I hear. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do we even begin to tackle the mindset or the deeply entrenched, cultural biases against women? Because the reality is, around the world, a lot of the unpaid labor and domestic work is still carried out by women, with the UN finding that even by 2050, women will be spending almost 10% more time daily on unpaid labor than men. So given this actual reality and this stark statistic, going back to what Sarah said, who controls the power, right? Ultimately, it is the men so far. How do we even begin to go back or go forward rather, and change their mindset?
Yeah. Yes, it's really a problem. The mindset and this ingrained mentality, these biases are really, it will take time to change. But as I said, we have to go to the kindergartens, to the elementary schools, just to fight or combat these insensitive approaches as soon as possible. But before then, actually, yes, even in Armenia, the situation is much more even troubling. I will bring some figures. As on average, women in Armenia spend 59 hours per week on domestic tasks, while men spend only 28 hours. And this imbalance actually, combined with a lack of childcare services, especially in rural communities, where only 17% of children are before 5 years are enrolled in any kindergarten or any educational space, which is awful actually, both from perspective of education right but also from perspective of women's rights. But if in rural communities there is a problem, but this doesn't mean that we don't have generally a problem in Yerevan, for example. Only 40%, I mean 70% of children before 5 years are not enrolled in any kindergarten. And this is not about like parents have no interest to do that. No, this is about there is no infrastructures, because there are very, very lack of state-run kindergartens. Okay, we have private kindergartens, but these are not affordable, are very, very expensive. So this is what state policy should be. Actually, last 5 years, there have been several reforms and lots of kindergartens were built, and now it's much more, the situation is much better, but in any case, 70% of children are not there, not getting education, and also their parents, their mothers, have to take this responsibility, have to stay at home, have to take this huge burden on them. So one of the main, the other pillar, as I said, after the educational reforms is infrastructure, huge reform and huge investments on this, because this will really change the situation. As I said, our students, 60% are in IT faculties, but later on they have to, actually, again, the figures are really very visual. For example, 83% of women in Armenia by the age of 14 are economically inactive, compared with just 70%. And this is not about the unemployment rate. This is about their burden having family responsibilities. While they have education, for example, we have 99.7%, almost 100% of women literacy. We have 70% of women in higher education system. So we have the capacity, but the state doesn't give them an opportunity to actually combine family responsibilities and work.
Thank you so much for that. I want to go back to the audience and see if there are any questions before we come back to any concluding thoughts with the panelists. And there is one there. Can we please get the mic? If you could just introduce yourself and what you do and just get to your question. Thank you so much. Oh, quite a few questions coming in. Perfect. I think we can take maybe 2, 3 at once.
Hi, my name's Charlotte Rose. I'm from North Star Leadership Development from Australia. I think so many of the points that you raised are pertinent to all of us in all of our countries. We face gender inequity, inequality in different domains in our various countries with different phases, right? I think the point that you raised around where we're seeing positions of power, the 27 countries of example we have today, is a great thing to illustrate that we are not there, but there are examples we can look to across the world in each of your domains. And I'm very aware that it's important to flag the challenges. One thing I find very often helpful is for us to also look at success stories. Where can we look to for examples of inspiration for improvement, enhancement, and evolution? So I'm just curious, within your own areas of interest, where do you look to as areas of example, whether that's in government or within business, where you say, yes, you know, that is something we can look to and should look to as examples for progression?
Thank you. If we can get the mic to the next person as well, we'll take as many questions as possible.
From Italy, thank you. Yeah, I second that. I really One thing I think it's really interesting that emerged from what we have discussed about. Sometimes women just think that they are not enough for a position, for a job, for something that they have to do. And sometimes, men just meet, golfing, playing tennis, I don't know. And yeah, and women don't, So every time it happens in a networking session or a conference on a workplace, men, since day one, they meet outside the workplace. They meet, they chat, they have beer,
Bromance,
whatever.
bromance,
We
each other.
don't. So maybe we have to teach women to
Sorry, can we get to the question given the interest of time? I agree with all your points. I'm right there with you.
Sorry. How can we, push women to do that too?
Got it. Okay. And then we have another question there.
Good morning. I'm Achal Malhotra from India, former ambassador of India to Irena and Georgia. You talked about mindset, and yes, I agree with you. Let's look at the auditorium. This hall is full. I mean, the women are outnumbering the men.
Yay!
Women talking to women about the women's problem, I think that speaks volumes about it. When we talk about the mindset, would you agree that the mindset has to be changed, not from the top, but from the below, that is from the family level? I know of many countries where the parents have inbuilt in a habitation, educating their children, girls, sending them out for jobs, and the overall, perceptions about the limitations the family is imposing on their own children. So I think the charity begins at home. Would you agree that the reforms must begin at the family level? Then, of course, the governments can only supplement.
Yes, absolutely. Let's just get the first set of questions answered, and then we'll move on to the next ones. If you could please keep the questions as well as the answers as brief as possible so we can get as many in. Thank you.
The first question, you mentioned that when it comes to investment, we are still having issues, and why. So one of the things that I noticed that we talk about as well was the fact that although we have programs that we push, especially for big VCs that have more than $1 billion, to invest on women, they just don't. So that's why I offered that, and I'm really working in Silicon Valley to make that happen, that have a VC company that only invests on women. And that VC company doesn't need to be managed by women VCs, it can be managed by men, but I want to have a role model. As you mentioned, it's extremely important to have a role model. It's extremely important to have an example. And right now, even in Silicon Valley, we do not have a good role model. We do not have numbers that shows actually women are better at entrepreneurship because we only have 2% of investment goes to women. How can we prove that, right? There are VCs that have billions of dollars and they wasted that on $200 million on people that really they just wasted this money on that. So that 200 million can go to all these women and see the result. So the question is how we can see the result, how we can create role model, and the only answer is to create an example, which we don't have in the VC world.
Yeah, thank you. I love the golfing question because preparing for this panel, I actually read a statistic that companies in which the board is golfing are less likely to have to take women on the board. I don't know about the causality there, but I think you're onto something. You know, I appreciate the kind of suggestion that we throw more parties and do more hobbies together. But I mean, obviously there's data that this whole care work question is what stands in the way, right? I mean, a man that traditionally goes to work in the morning, returns in the evening, and then, you know, does not like the childcare part of it, the elderly care part of it, and all of that to do, that's a relevant piece of the puzzle. And I think it's also important to say that in this area specifically, we cannot have gender equality at the expense of other inequalities, right? So what we see a lot is that we have, for example, parliaments in the global south as well, with a high share of women in parliament, but the question is, who does the care work in these systems? Is it people from other classes? Is it people who are even, you know, kind of attracted as workers from other countries and then do not have rights, the rights that they deserve as care workers? So the whole care chain is also international. It's interclass and it's intersectional. And I think this is an important thing to reflect, that obviously white feminism is not going to solve it in the end. I think one thing that was mentioned was mentorship, and mentorship is important, but there is also newer research on why mentorship doesn't work, asking about positive examples. That was lacking is not actually teach the women to go golfing more or to do X, Y, Z, but actually people standing in for candidates with their own reputation. It's called sponsorship. So in addition to mentorship, telling and teaching women what they need to do better, you actually need also men in leadership position who stand in for a candidate and say this is the right person with their own reputation. And then the role of governments, I mean, there is of course a role, and in the opening session, I think it was Samir who said that the think tank sector also doesn't, you know, always come around with the best ideas and the most innovative ideas. There's obviously also a point about investing in the philanthropy sector and in the NGO sector. We have the badly paid jobs in the NGO sector also done disproportionately by women, and then the men having a much easier time actually getting funding for whatever it is they want to do.
Thank you. A lot about unconscious biases that we need to discuss. We have time for just 2 more questions, and the 2 people up front have been waiting very patiently. I'm really sorry. We'll try and get to you. If we can keep the questions and the answers as brief as possible, we'll take more.
Hello, everybody. My name is Noni Cabrera. I come from the Philippines. And today I wear an academic hat, and I'd just like to react to what Charlotte said, which I agree 100%. We should look at the good examples, and coming from the Philippines, and coming from a family of strong and loud and opinionated women.
Sorry, are you reacting or do you have a question?
I am reacting, but also having a report.
Let's get to the question, please.
The Philippines has always enjoyed a very high participation rate and gender. We rank consistently in gender gap reports, and I think one of the examples that have always led to good results is the way that the Philippines has structured legislation, so that, for example, one of the classic examples is we have a 5% budgeting tool for gender, and the gender and development coefficient in our budgeting has always worked in such a way that it has led to significant results in the government sector. So for instance, we have a budget for these gender development programs that raise awareness on substantive issues, which also push towards the private sector, because now that there is an initiative in the public sector, in the government sector, then in the private sector it translates to more corporate social responsibility and diversity, inclusion activities that they do. As what Sarah said, in terms of substantive participation and how it actually translates to results, it's not a perfect system, but we're working towards it. And on that note, we're just glad to report that the Philippines is actually hosting the International Conference on Women, Peace and Security in October. We would...
sorry.
No problem. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
okay. Can we get the mic over here, please? Sorry, up front, right here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My question
question is also very much related to the comment of the previous commenter. I also come from a country where 70% of the government is women, and it's not actually positions that have to do with childcare, or we have former ministers of finance, economy. I'm deputy minister of economy, and our prime minister actually is a man, but the deputy prime minister is a woman. So in the context of having role models, I would say that this is a very good role model, having 70% of the
Question,
women. And
please.
the question is it enough? Because when you see the gap in employment, we have around 12% of gap in employment. So basically it means that no matter how good the public policies are, and we also do gender budgeting, by the way, so in terms of public policies, I think we're doing everything right, but obviously in order to get the message through, having role models only from the public sector is probably not enough. So what else could be done? I mean, how can you reach to have the effect of these policies also in the private sector, because having a gender gap in employment is one of the indicators that goes to show that the problem is still persistent. Probably the change in mentality could be one of them, but I would really like to know more from the panelists what else could be done in this respect.
Okay, thank you. Kabir and Natalie, do we have time for one more question? No? Okay, so we're going to end it here, and panelists, over to you. Any closing thoughts, and whoever wants to answer this. So Amin and Dan.
Really good questions. Just a statement that will probably answer a few of the questions together. In the climate industry, there's this term called greenwashing. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard. So it's about when a company pretends to care about the environment, they take certain initiatives, while actually they don't, right? I think when it comes to gender equality, I don't know what the term can be, gender washing. I think there's a term for it? Okay. What's it? Okay. So I think that's what's happening. A lot of companies in the private sector, including ours, normally we do it because, we'll get VC funding. Let's have one board seat for women out of 5. Let's have the HR head become a woman. So, and let's have at least 40% women in terms of statistics. A lot of the companies are doing basis of, I don't know what's the term, gender washing. So I think if actually we care, then only the mindset, like the ambassador sir said, if the mindset changes and we're not washing things, then only the real change will happen, because a lot of these initiatives that's happening today are based on, this particular thing.
Is it? Yeah. I want to respond on the question of networking and women involvement, because this is really very important, and thank you very much for this remark or question, because yes, we have to empower not just through different mentorship, etc., but we have to create platforms for girls and for women. So they have to have a platform for networking. They have to have, because men usually have their main kind of networks, process of networking, but women really are outside of this. So policymakers or civil society, and we are actually doing it, creating environment for them, creating platforms for them. And one remark about the family's involvement and starting all from the family, very, very agree, and this is really very good and important point. From policymakers' perspective, that's why I'm saying we have to go schools, and we have to start from kindergarten to change these ingrained mentalities. But also media has a huge role in this. So I'm not talking just news or news-making media, but also general soap operas. They have a huge, in our case, in Armenia, soap operas are really enforcing the insensitive approaches, insensitive norms. And while state has to have policies to push, to encourage, to create new soap operas in order to change these norms. And about the family and role model, I have one small personal story. My daughter was 5 years old when I took her to the parliamentarian faction meeting, and her reaction was really interesting. She said, "Oh, mom, I didn't even know that men can also be a parliamentarian," because she knew me as a role model, and for her it was surprising that, oh, men can also be a parliamentarian. So yes, this should be a huge shift if we will have this more and more models, role models.
Thank you so much. One thing I really did not anticipate during this panel was that I'm going to have immense regret for not going for the golf lessons my dad signed me up for when I was a kid. So thank you for that. I think I need to go and enroll myself. From sub-Saharan Africa to Silicon Valley, I think it's clear that a lot of the challenges that women face remain the same, both when it comes to policy, access to capital, as well as cultural and societal barriers. And I think we're walking away with some very tangible strategies and also success stories, such as what you're doing in Croatia, in terms of how we can level the playing field and also start opening up some of the capital for women to have access to. And as the ambassador said, it shouldn't just be women speaking to women. The onus also needs to come to men, especially on a familial level. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Thank you.